we've got a few things which might be interesting to talk about. Number one, do autistic people lack empathy? Do autistic people have normal empathy, but it varies? Or do autistic people have hyper empathy? Let's have a couple of seconds to think about that. The answer is it's fairly normal. Autistic people do not have any deficits in terms of empathy. That is a big myth propagated by Lorna Wing. For some people, maybe they do. It's very personal. It's not really related to whether someone's autistic or not. The hyper-empathy, it's a bit of a sort of a reactionary myth, in a sense. Like, usually when people have big myths and stigmas out there, they try to sort of counteract it by giving sort of the opposite, sort of equally more sort of stigmatizing myth. A lot of autistic people do tend to have a lot of empathy for people because we tend to have a lot of negative experiences in life. But it's not really related to being autistic, really. And some people definitely do have a lot of empathy for others. I see it a lot. The reason why people think that autistic people don't have empathy is because we struggle to read facial expressions and body language. This is this idea of cognitive empathy, being able to tell how someone's feeling by looking at them, by them not telling you. You see it a lot, especially in schools. Kids don't realize that they've hurt another kid. As soon as they realize, they're very empathic and want to make sure that they're okay. That's the adaptive element. That's the sort of lay interpretation of empathy. The adaptive element is actually empathy. The cognitive element is just understanding it. Number two, autistic people don't desire friends, or they desire friends, or introverts don't as much, or extroverts do. Interesting one. Autism related to social communication, interaction? The answer is likely. It varies, again, from person to person. Some people like a lot of interaction. I know some extroverted autistic people. I also know some people who just generally feel quite happy on their own, just doing their own thing. We can struggle when it comes to friends, but because we are human, and humans desire some kind of social reciprocity to keep us healthy and happy, it's still a need that we have. And the myth that we don't want friends because we tend to struggle is not true. It's just that we can find it hard, particularly within the school system, to navigate social environments. This is an interesting one. Are autistic people more honest and good? Are they more deceitful and malevolent and evil? Or is there no link between autism and morality? The answer is there is no link. It's not necessarily tied to someone's moral values as a person. Generally, when we say things like that, again, it's kind of this myth that started sort of before. It used to be, autistic people used to be seen as like devil children, or kids that don't have any empathy for other kids and they're awful. Some can struggle actually with being deceitful. Others don't. Again, it varies from person to person. But we do tend to be loyal to our own moral compass. So we kind of stick to our own values quite a bit. Usually we can be a little bit more trusting of people, which can lead us down some concerning routes in relationships. We tend to have less social restraints when it comes to communication, so we prefer to be honest over perhaps risking upsetting people and sort of being polite maybe is the word. Again, this is a bit more of a reactionary myth that we're all honest and good because they're trying to counteract this idea of autism being bad and we're not empathetic, but it's not true. And in fact, I would probably argue it's a little bit, to a certain degree, infantilizing, that, you know, we're not human beings who also have the same capacity to do anything that other people do. It's just not true. Look at the news, see articles, you see lots of great people, lots of criminals and people who are also autistic. So there is no link necessarily. Last one here, I believe. Autistic people are great at, it varies. Maths, data and coding, or writing fiction and art. What are autistic people generally good at? The answer is, again, it varies from person to person. There are definitely a lot of people, perhaps in Silicon Valley, you might have heard of news at one point where there was a boom of autism in Silicon Valley and everyone was confused and thinking it was something in the water or something related to the silicone of some people developing autism, but it was actually just because a lot of the people who worked there were autistic themselves and they were having autistic children and they didn't know they were autistic. So we can definitely be good at maths, data and coding. However, from my experience talking to people, we do tend to err on the side a little bit of writing fiction and art in general from talking to lots of people. Sport, maybe as well. We can sometimes struggle with the coordination aspect of it, because quite often we can have some dyspraxic elements to our diagnosis. But also some of the world's top athletes are autistic people. World's strongest man, Tom Stoltman. There's a few sort of high-level combat athletes like Mikey Muzanevsky, who's sort of a bit Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like world champion. So it really depends on the person, what they're interested in, how focused they are. There are actually a lot of things to do with autism and sport which are quite beneficial, as you can imagine, the routine of it, the ability to focus, the special interests. It kind of lines up very well. But it varies person to person. Oh dear. That should say don't underestimate variation, if I haven't highlighted it enough. There are so many other factors to a person other than the neurodiversity. It is a pretty large part, and it's a part that people talk about the most because it's the most sort of misunderstood, mischaracterized. But we too have other factors involved, such as our age, our demographic, our education, our personality traits, whether we hide our autism, that's a really big factor, what we're interested in, how much self-development, personal growth we've done, related to how intelligent we are, that is another factor which is quite key there. So there's a lot of ways that people can vary person to person. I like to think of, again, the text seems to have dropped down for some reason. I like to think of autism as somewhat like in the view of a game. When you start a sort of a role-playing game, usually given a spreadsheet of sort of points that you can put into your base stats, your base, who you are as a person, what you're good at, your genetics, basically. Perhaps for some of us, including myself, maybe my charisma was probably down at about 1 before I started learning how to speak and sort of communicate effectively. I'd say probably intelligence was quite up there, maybe strength was quite up there, but it's kind of like we start off in sort of with a different array of skills and traits. And as we go through life, we obviously level up in whatever way that we want to, whatever way that our sort of internal brain makes us want to do. Interesting. So that might be a good way of viewing it, I think. Just because you are born a certain way, just because you can struggle with communication does not mean that you can't develop that aspect of yourself if you want to.